My name is Rebeca Eigen, and I'm an astrologer in Houston, Texas. And I started studying astrology in 1985, so a long time ago. And my primary interest in studying astrology was that I was very interested in why relationships repeated. And so I'd like to tell you all a story of how I started learning about Jungian psychology and how I got into Jung. And why I found that it was so important that I wanted to get out and share it. And although this story is on many of my videos, I'd like to go ahead and say it again because I feel like it is a very valuable story to help you all understand why I thought it was important. And many of you may have not heard this, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. Back in the late 80s, I was going to a metaphysical Christian church where they teach the power of positive thinking, and it was a very uplifting and inspiring church and a wonderful place to be. And I was learning how to think positive. So as I was in that part of myself, always into the positive, inspiring, happy-go-lucky side of me, I was getting darker and darker in the unconscious, and I didn't know it. And the reason for that is that there is a compensatory nature to the psyche. The psyche is striving for wholeness, and wholeness is balance. So as I was going around only in one side of me, the opposite extreme was in my unconscious to the same degree. And around 1988, I ordered this report. It is a psychological horoscope analysis report by the world's most famous astrologer, Liz Green. And I'm now authorized to sell her reports. And I do sell a lot of them on my website, shadowdance.com. And I ordered this report, and it was so accurate. I mean, I underlined the whole thing. I had to read it in I don't know how many different colors of pens over and over. And over the years, I've gotten more and more out of it. So they're fabulous. And she talked about the shadow in here. And I didn't accept that. You know, it's like, oh, but I'm not like that. And I just shoved it aside and put it aside, and I forgot about it. Well, around 1990, a really good friend of mine started introducing me to some cassette tapes by a Jungian analyst in training who was an Episcopalian priest. And at this time, he was only an Episcopalian priest. He was studying, he was getting his doctorate, but he was studying to become a Jungian analyst, but he was also teaching. And so I decided, you know, I was listening to him, and he was really making me think. And he was using vocabulary and things that he would say that I knew nothing about, that didn't add up to what I was believing at the time, which was really to basically stay in my light, in my positive thinking side all the time, which is, you know, nothing that you don't want to do, but it's learning to see our shadow is part of going into our own unconscious. At any rate, I went to see this man. I'm sitting there staring at him. We were in the Sunday school class, and then we went to the Mass. And I was sitting there in my arms. I mean, I couldn't stand him. And I was feeling this in my body. And my friend said, "Do you want to leave?" She could feel it. And I said, yes. So I went home, and I obsessed about him, which is one of the ways that a shadow quality will present for you. You will obsess about the person. You will not be able to get it out of your mind. So that afternoon, I kept thinking about him, and I thought, maybe I should go give him a positive thinking tape or something, because what I was seeing in him was that he was cynical and depressed, and it was uncomfortable for me. Whenever I would meet people like that, I would really quickly try to get out of it, or try to get them into my positive, upbeat philosophy as quickly as possible, because it was uncomfortable for me. At any rate, that afternoon, as I was obsessing about him, I suddenly remembered something he said. He had said the word shadow in one of those cassettes, and it triggered something in my mind, and I went to the closet, I got this out, and I read it again. And it said that my shadow was cynical and depressed because it was compensating for my overly optimistic view of life. And I sat there reading that and realized that, yes, I was seeing this in him. And I started crying. And all of the dark feelings and all of the disappointments that I had shoved aside, that I would say to myself, oh, well, it'll work out. All of the negative feelings that my authentic, real, instinctual feelings, I would just push into the unconscious. And I would totally repress and go into denial that I even felt that way, because it wasn't my ideal. It wasn't what I wanted to believe about myself. And I sat there that afternoon crying because I realized that it was my shadow, that it was something that I had seen repeat. And so I called and made an appointment with him. And I found out from him that he was teaching a 12-week course in analytical psychology at the Young Center. And in the last 25 years, he taught it 3 times, and I took it all 3 times. And I've taken many, many, many classes with this man since 1990. So he became my mentor, my teacher, and somebody who inspired me to understand Jungian psychology. And the shadow, and I'm going to share my screen. Our shadow is everything about us that is unconscious, repressed, denied, and undeveloped. There's actually undeveloped parts of us that are gold, that are positive things about us that we know nothing about. So cynicism and being cynical and depressed was really a compensation for my overly optimism, my unreality. I was ungrounded, and that part of me was acting against me. And so when we're born, I am an astrologer, and I started studying astrology in 85. And when we're born without a certain element like Earth, we have to develop it. That is a part of us that we actually have to develop. When we're lacking an element, when we're lacking air, fire, earth, or water, which is the same as thinking, sensation, intuition, and feeling. They're almost the same, pretty clearly. And those are the parts that we are all made of. These are the archetypes. This is the archetypal foundation of all of us. And I went to take this class with him, and I also had a personal counseling session with him, and he admitted to me that he was depressed, and he was cynical. And he said he was going through a life change. He was going through a transition, and he was leaving the church, Christ Church Cathedral in Houston. He was leaving that and moving on to being a Jungian analyst full time. And so he was going through something, and that's why he was that's why I could see it, because it was there. So when you see something in another person, it's usually an extreme, and that's why you can see it. But it's actually something that you badly need, but from a different perspective. Cynicism is the opposite of idealism, but having that in balance makes you realistic. And it was something that I was sorely lacking. And therefore, my unconscious was compensating by bringing people to me who were extremely realistic. And, as I said, when you have a lot of certain elements and you have none in the other, I have a lot of air and fire. Air and fire are intuition and thinking. And so those are very strong in my character, and something that I could identify with very easily when I read this report, but the opposite was in my shadow. So I want to share my screen and show you Jung's, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to bring up Keynote. And this is a definition of the shadow. The shadow is a psychological term. It describes everything about us that is unconscious, repressed, undeveloped, or denied. The shadow describes the person we would rather not be and don't want to know about either. The curious thing about our shadow is that it includes both dark and light aspects of our being that we know nothing about. These are the parts of us that we've been missing. And this is the gift of shadow work, and one of the main reasons that we badly need to acknowledge our shadow. We need these parts. So think about it. Go inside yourself and ask yourself, what am I an extreme about? What is strong in my character? Because this is how you will start to do shadow work and bring those parts of you back. And also ask yourself, what is repeating? If something is repeating, the unconscious really wants you to see it. And it will continue to repeat until you bring yourself along and come into a balance. I'm still idealistic. I mean, that is a strong part of me. I'm still very idealistic, but I'm also aware of my shadow. Or I'm aware of some parts of my shadow. This is a never-ending goal. To be conscious of our shadow is a lifelong retrieval process. Nobody does this overnight, and it is, as Ed Edinger says in his books, exceedingly difficult to do, because it's a lot easier to point our finger at another person and say, you're like that. It's a lot easier to reject a person because they're like that. And you're fighting with that part of yourself. So doing shadow work will actually help you in your relationships like no other thing that I can imagine. I mean, to me, it is the most essential ingredient to having a successful and conscious relationship, because we polarize with people. One person takes one extreme and the other person takes another extreme. And we wouldn't even be attracted to them in the first place. We wouldn't be attracted to them unless they were carrying a part of us we don't know about. So that's why there is a fascination. So raise your hand. Have you ever met anybody you couldn't stand? And have you ever fallen madly in love? Because this too is a part of your shadow. And I'm going to read a quote by Jung. And it is this one. A fascination of this kind is never exercised by one person upon another. It is always a phenomenon of relationships, which requires two people, insofar as the person fascinated necessarily has a corresponding disposition. But the disposition must be unconscious, or no fascination will take place. The fascination is a compulsive phenomenon in the sense that it lacks a conscious motive. It is not a process of will, but something that rises up from the unconscious and forcibly obtrudes itself upon the conscious mind. So when this happens to all of us, we are either shadow hugging or shadow boxing. So to ask yourself, what does it mean? Why is this person in my life? Why is this repeating? Because there is a teleology to life. Teleology just means it's leading somewhere. Instead of cause and effect, teleology implies that everything has a purpose and that consciousness is being developed inside of us through these patterns, through these mirrors that we are seeing in others that keep continually parading in front of us. And this is where astrology is so valuable, because we are a huge cast of characters, and you will see that in your birth chart. You will have all of the archetypes are present. The moon is our mother. Mars is how we take action. Venus is how we attract. Every different planet is descriptive of an archetype. And these archetypes and the signs that they're in are going to explain to you the parts of you that you have to develop and that are being developed. They're actually ongoing. It's part of who we are. And the stronger the repetition is, the stronger a repeating pattern is, the more painful it gets. And we all know that pain is no fun, but pain is actually is essential for growth. We don't grow because we're super happy. We grow because something hurts. And we're having something that's challenging us. And so doing shadow work, doing work in your own unconscious, is what will lead to more and more and more, basically, authenticity. Authenticity of who you are and who you came here to be, the light and the dark side of you. Everybody has both. We all have what are called hard aspects in the birth chart, squares and oppositions, or difficult placements, conjunctions that are difficult. We all have different things in our horoscope that can show us the parts of us that are challenging. And we're not getting rid of anything. We don't get rid of our shadow. We learn to include more. And the most valuable place in the whole chart is our 7th house, which is why I became a 7th house astrologer. The 7th house is 180 degrees opposite of what we identify with. And I'll show you, I'll share my screen again, and I'll show you what that would look like. This is a basic chart, and this is the first house right here on the left is our persona or mask. It's our personality. It's our persona, is what Jungians call our persona. And we're going to delve deeply as the weeks go on. Every week I'm going to take a subject and I'm going to go into it more. But the first house is what we identify with. It's our physical body even. This is how people see us when they first see us. Well, the exact opposite, 180 degrees away, is our marriage house. So our marriage house is exactly the opposite of what we identify with. It's not who we identify with at all. I am assuming that you all can see when I'm sharing screen. So if I'm not, let me know. I am actually going to look on my phone to see if anybody has joined. And here's one person. Hi, thanks for doing this. Hope to be able to join for the next one. Okay. So far, that's the only comment that I see. So I'm going to keep going. It's 12:17 right now. I only plan to talk for 15 minutes and then actually, be able to answer questions and have a discussion. To be able to look at our shadow in this way, to look into why this is so valuable to us in our relationships is my purpose in what I do with astrology. There are lots of great astrologers in the world for predictions and for all kinds of other reasons, health, finances, but that was not going to be my primary interest. Has always been relationships and wanting to help people understand through their shadow how to bring their relationship into balance so that both people are aware of their lacks and their compensating acts that they have going on between them, because we will polarize with the other person. We'll start doing one extreme, they'll start doing the other extreme. When I left my husband, I have Aquarius on the 7th house cusp. And I left, my husband had the moon at 9 degrees Aquarius, exactly on my 7th house cusp, which is the marriage house, marriage, partnerships, and open enemies. Why did the ancients call this house the house of open enemies? Because our partner has to become our enemy if we refuse to live that part of us out. If we refuse to live the sign out or the planets that are there, which are archetypes, then we will pull somebody else. And that's why we were fascinated with them to begin with.